The Lane Kiffin to Florida rumors are about to get really loud. Should Ole Miss fans worry this time?
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast tackles something that Rebel fans are all too familiar with: Lane Kiffin job rumors in the middle of a football season. It's kind of old hat at this point. After Saturday's meltdown, though, against LSU, and with Ole Miss's playoff hopes hanging by a thread, the buzz is going to get louder and louder again, and this time it's the Florida job. Several prominent Gator insiders have mentioned Kiffin as a top choice if Billy Napier is on his way out. It's all over the internet to begin with. We'll discuss how serious these rumors are and just how loud the noise will get as the season continues. And also, don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy. They offer more perspectives on the SEC and even Ole Miss, honestly. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So really interesting stuff with Ole Miss dropping the game in overtime against LSU. They're essentially 2 plays away from being 7-0, but at the end of the day, they're 5-2, and their playoff hopes are hanging by a thread. We all remember what the Ole Miss and Auburn situation was in 2022 when everybody was certain that Lane Kiffin was going there, but he ended up staying at Ole Miss. 2023 was a magical year, and then we set up for this last dance season. That's really not helping the situation right now as far as the people on the internet seeing the last dance. But Ole Miss set up with all of that. Florida has been talking about replacing Billy Napier since before the season with Lane Kiffin. All of the boosters in Florida are really in line for Lane Kiffin to be their choice 1 and their choice 2 if a job opening happens in Florida. They're serious, everybody. Now, the board of directors was not a Lane Kiffin fan in the first search. Was it 3 years ago? I think that prominent boosters are looking at bypassing the board of directors right now in order to kind of make this hire on their own. They're sick of losing. There's only been 2 coaches in their history, in Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer, that have won big at Florida. The rest of them has kind of been 3 and done. It's kind of been a difficult place to win. And Florida is sick of losing. I think this is their 3rd or 4th coach in a row since Urban Meyer, to where other than Dan Mullen getting to 1 Cotton Bowl in like 2019 or 2020, there hasn't been too much to crow about from the Florida Gators recently. So they're trying to look for any way to make their program relevant again. And the name that's going to pop up for them is Lane Kiffin. They want Lane Kiffin because, honestly, Lane Kiffin brings attention to whatever coach he coaches. Lane Kiffin's name is what I call SEO catnip, social media catnip. Lane Kiffin being associated with everything makes everything around it grow. It brings in attention. Ole Miss's enrollment is up when everybody else is down because Lane Kiffin is the head coach of the football team. Florida sees all of that, and they think, hey, we're ready for this. Now, here's the thing. I don't know that Ole Miss really needs to worry about this. I think Ole Miss is the perfect stop for Lane Kiffin, and he can get away with so much more at Ole Miss than he ever could with the Florida Gators. I think for Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss is a better job right now in college football, because if he wins 10, 11 games a year like he's currently doing at Ole Miss will put a statue out front. And he can get away with a lot of the stuff that he's not going to be able to get away with at Florida or whatever big time perception-wise jobs that are out there. Right now, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon after practice, and they decide that with a day off the next day, he wants to go deep sea fishing. He just catches a flight to Florida, deep sea fishes for the day, comes back the next day for practice, and it's all good. Everything works out. All of the traditions that Ole Miss has, uniform-wise, out the window. Lane Kiffin wears what he wants to wear. Against Oklahoma, they're going to be debuting a new Realtree helmet that has a chance to look really good. Keep an eye on collegecornerstore.com for that to populate, because it's already showing up on online shops. Whenever it hits College Corner Store, give Scott a call and pick one of those up, because those look really nice. I'm going to get the long sleeve sweats t-shirt version of that. Lane Kiffin can do so much stuff at Ole Miss that he has no prayer of doing at other places. And I think that's a major advantage for Ole Miss, especially when you consider he's making $9 million a year, which means Florida, in order to even get him, will probably have to do a Jimbo level contract for it to happen. Okay. You're going to have to offer him $15 million a year, all guaranteed for like 8 years. That's the only way that you're going to get Lane Kiffin out of Oxford. Now, the question that everybody is going to have, and this is what the Florida fans are going to hope for, and Ole Miss fans are going to hear about it, is with Ole Miss out of the playoffs, if they lose another game and them hanging on by a thread currently, with all of the expectations that Lane Kiffin has put into this fan base and how upset they are. Lane Kiffin in the press conference yesterday talked about how he was impressed that Ole Miss fans are upset right now because it shows that they have raised the expectations. But because of that and the accountability and all of that going on, if Ole Miss does not make the playoffs after this season with the amount of turnover that they have, all the Florida fans are going to point to that as a reason why Lane Kiffin might be ready to get out of Oxford. So that's explaining why Florida is going to do that. Now, I've had several Florida media members, reach out to me over the last couple of weeks, people that I know pretty well, from my days at Rivals and all over. They reached out to me and they said, hey, this is going on. This is what I think is going to happen. This is what they want to happen. This is all speculation at this point. So the details are not important. But the main common thread in this is Florida thinks, whether it's true or not, they think they can get Lane. Okay? Florida thinks they can get Lane. Florida media members are all working on pre-production for when Billy Napier gets fired about Lane Kiffin. Remember, there is a major difference between Florida Atlantic and Tampa and Miami and Gainesville, Florida. Okay? Florida Atlantic and Miami, that's like having a job in the Caribbean. Even Tampa, to some extent, is beautiful. South Florida is unbelievably beautiful on the coastline. Gainesville's Panama City. Gainesville's Mobile. Gainesville's Tallahassee. And that's an important distinction of where the university actually sits. It's not South Florida. It's not the deep sea fishing culture. Gainesville is an hour away from the ocean, and it's probably not a good area of the ocean. I mean, the closest you can get to in Florida on the Gulf side is in the Big Bend somewhere. So understand that. I just genuinely don't think that Lane Kiffin would take the Florida job. I just don't. I don't see the benefit for Lane Kiffin to take that job. You want to talk about, can you win here or can you win there? I know that Ole Miss has had multiple coaches go to Access Bowls, and Florida's been to one in 10 years. I know that. You want to talk about money? They haven't had money over the last 4 coaches. Why do we think they're going to have money this time? And I get that they want it, and everybody talks about want to, and everybody talks is like they're going to really be serious this time. And they've always said they're going to be really serious. It doesn't work that way. So we will see what happens. I just genuinely think the noise is about to get really loud, just based on the interactions that I've had with Florida media people over the last couple of weeks. So we'll see what happens. If Ole Miss loses a game, it's going to get really loud. But if Ole Miss still has that playoff thread available, it's not going to be quite as loud. But pay attention, have some thick skin, a little bit of water off of the duck's back right now is required for Ole Miss fans as well. We're over halfway through the season that's hanging by a thread. How does the offensive line stack up after 7 games? How does the offense stack up? Join us as we break down the grades and see where the Rebels need to improve. All right, Locked On Ole Miss fans, it's time for our Roy Player of the Week. The Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes. Unlike collectives, where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy lets you choose a specific athlete that you want to support. You back the players you care about, and in return, you get exclusive content after the season, like personal videos and update. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create that content, you get your money back. This week, I'm choosing Ulysses Bentley IV for his 107-yard and 1 TD performance at LSU. I contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy and want you to join me by making a payment of as little as $10. When enough of us contribute, it's not just about the dollars, it's about the message that we're sending to Ulysses Bentley IV. Together, our collective support helps him stay connected to our school. Plus, Roy is doing their part to bring the fans closer to their schools and athletes in an exciting giveaway. Roy is giving away one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November. Here's how to enter. Just download Roy in the App Store or Google Play. Use code LOCKEDON. That's 2 words when signing up, and you're entered. If you're already on Roy, make a payment to any athlete's campaign, and you'll also be automatically entered. No purchase is necessary and void is where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for official rules. Download Roy and try it out. There's no subscription or recurring fees. And for as little as $10, you can get in on the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. All right, so let's get into a little bit of midseason grades. We're in the weeks after the week 7 and into the bye week this weekend. Before we get started, here's our Locked On Player of the Game, our Roy Player of the Game, where I'm donating $100 into his Roy account. That's Ulysses Bentley IV. He had 11 carries, 107 yards, and a touchdown. Now, if you want to look at the midseason report card, number 1, Dart does not look like the quarterback that we expect to have in year 3. Dart's still playing pretty well. He's got like 14 touchdowns and 2,300 yards or something like that. He's leading the SEC and he's way up there in the country, but he does not look like we expected him to look. We were all expecting Eli Manning. He looks almost like a worse version than he was a year ago, but still plenty of time to improve, but the offense has to improve as well. And also, the second thing is, does Lane Kiffin even know who the best 5 offensive linemen are right now on Ole Miss's team? Do you have the trust that happens? The offensive line doesn't quite look right. Ole Miss accumulated all this depth in the offseason, and they used it with an anti-depth chart spring practice and a kinder, gentler fall practice, and they just absolutely weren't ready for SEC play. And because of those 2 things, I think that Ole Miss just does not know who their best 5 offensive linemen are right now. And also the third thing is, I think this offense is a little bit too reliant on Trey Harris at the moment. Trey Harris is accounting for about 35% of the passing game and is almost over 1,000 yards. I get feed your studs, all of that stuff. This is kind of an extreme version of that. When you look at Jaxson Dart's numbers this season, 151 for 215 yards, 2,384 yards, 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Again, really good numbers. He's on pace to be the single season passing leader in Ole Miss history. He's on pace to be the career passing leader in Ole Miss history. He's on pace to be the career total offense leader in Ole Miss history. He's on pace to break every record known to man, but I swear right now he is not right. Something's not going on. Maybe he's pressing too hard. Maybe this whole last dance thing is getting to him. Maybe that's something that we need to look at. Maybe Jaxson just needs to play a little bit looser, read his keys and all of that stuff, and everything's going to be fine. We talked to Tim Thomas, who is the basketball wizard. And last year when Matthew Morrell was going through a scoring slump, Tim Thomas kept saying, play defense and rebound, play defense and rebound. That'll get you out of your scoring slump, playing defense and rebound. And what he means by that is handle the little things outside that you can control, and the scoring's going to come if you stop pressing so much and thinking so much about that. If you concentrate on playing defense and rebounding, your stroke is going to get a lot better. By the way, before we start, Ole Miss is preseason, I think, number 23 or 24 in the AP in men's basketball. Congratulations to Chris Beard and his team. We're working to try and get interviews there, and we're going to have Tim Thomas on later on in the week to talk about that. Ole Miss has a closed-door scrimmage this weekend at the Houston Cougars. So Jaxson Dart doesn't look right at the moment. He just doesn't. The interception that he threw against LSU was one of the worst interceptions that he has thrown at Ole Miss. He reverted back to 2022, Jaxson Dart. And I get that it looked open. And I get that big plays can be made. But there's a question of can and should. And you have to be situationally aware of the game state at that moment. To where if Ole Miss kicks a field goal on that drive, they go up 10 points with like 6 or 7 minutes to go in the game. Ole Miss going into that drive, into that interception, had like a 92% chance probability-wise of winning that game. With a field goal made there that's going up to 96, 97, 98, 90, somewhere in there in the high 90s, to where that game is basically over. And Ole Miss losing a game with giving up a tying touchdown with 37 seconds left in a game where they held LSU's offense to 1 touchdown for 59 minutes. Ole Miss should have won that game. That interception completely turned it around. It was a game-changing moment. And the inability to hit all the receivers and focusing in on one receiver in Trey Harris specifically is problematic. Ole Miss has a couple of weeks to kind of get right, but we are getting dangerously close to they are being what they are. And maybe the defenses that Ole Miss is going up against have kind of figured out this Lane Kiffin offense. Listen, this offense is not complex. It can't be. The faster you want to go, the simpler the offense has to be. The example of what that looks like in real life and real time is when Ole Miss had the 4th and 1 from the 5-yard line in the first quarter, where they tried to run inside zone to Henry Parrish, and Jordan Watkins had to single block a SEC defensive end. And surprise, surprise, he did not win that. Ole Miss did not get the 4th and 1, even though they had a 4th and 1 player on the bench. Whenever you go fast, the faster you want to go, the more simple your offense has to get. If you want to throw in wrinkles and things like that, you've got to go slower. So Ole Miss has to view tempo one way or another in this situation. Is tempo the most important thing, or is the right personnel the most important thing? And with Ole Miss having a defense that is honestly really, really good, the offense can do so much to help out that defense, and they're just not right now. We did on the podcast yesterday, we talked about a good defense is always going to be a supporting character in a Lane Kiffin offense this season. It's just going to happen. But Jaxson Dart has not looked good. I think he's pressing at the moment. I think he needs to loosen up. I think something needs to happen to get him to relax and just start playing football again. Maybe it was the loss to LSU, but I think he's carrying too much of a load right now, and it's affecting him with his ball placement. The difference in a pass from here and here is a completion and an incompletion. It doesn't look like much, and it's a ball that's delivered 35 yards downfield. But if the ball is put in the right place, which we've all seen that Jaxson Dart has the ability to do that, the receiver has a chance to make a play. And also, Ole Miss needs to get Juice Wells in the inside. They just do. Run after the catch has always been his strong suit. Putting him on the outside and throwing jump balls to him and treating him like DK Metcalf is giving him a disservice and not using him the way that, honestly, he got famous in 2022. He was a run after catch type guy. I think we need to put him in the slot and get him the football and target him quite a bit. Put him on the same side of the field as Trey Harris and watch the defense have trouble dealing with both of those guys when you have Jordan Watkins and Caden Lee on the other side. Just my opinion there. But we'll see. Jaxson Dart, just this season, numbers look good, doesn't look right at the moment. So if that gets fixed in the Oklahoma game or in the Arkansas game, this defense can kind of start being, or this offense can start being what they were in the early part of the season. Also, the offensive line remains the biggest concern on this team. Could it be that Lane Kiffin and John Garrison don't even know who their top 5 players are on the offensive line? We'll break down the issues and what it means for the Ole Miss moving forward. Hey, NFL fans, we're starting off the season with big returns on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, Ole Miss is a pick'em for this week in the bye week, and the over-under is at 0.5. Of course, I'm kidding, of course. But tune in next week to see how the Rebels stack up against the Oklahoma Sooners through FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, so it's an interesting situation right now. In Lane Kiffin's press conference yesterday, he talked about them needing to rotate and move people around on the offensive line because they need to find different personnel to go there. And this is infuriating to me, probably more so than all of everybody else. Maybe it's just because I sat in those rooms. Maybe it's because I was 6 feet away from the offensive line room. I understand how important that position is, even if I don't understand all the intricacies of playing that position, if we're clear about it. But offensive line has always been a cohesion-based unit on the field. When other team players can take these short turnaround, the offensive line has always been the unit that needed cohesion because you need to trust the player that's next to you. If you don't trust the player that's next to you, you're going to have problems. If you don't trust the players to the right and left of you, you're going to try to do too much. If you try to block their guy and your guy, you're not going to block either of them. So cohesion of that 5-man unit in this team sport is very important. And this is why I complained during all spring about how they were handling spring practice this year, to where Ole Miss was so anti-depth chart throughout this whole season. Everything they did during spring was to prevent a depth chart from even being guessed at by the current players on their team, which led to less reps for the better players on your roster and you not knowing who those better players on your roster are. Questions that could have been in good shape by the fall, they were not settled at the end of spring, and to where they were moving around and they were still moving those players, even during the visible players, during the kinder, gentler fall camp. Cohesion could not be built. Trust could not be built. The right players on the field you weren't exactly sure about because the less reps that were filmed means that coaches who are notoriously slow decision makers to begin with are more likely to make the wrong decision. We can make jokes about hot dog eating contest and all of that because that one event really definitely doesn't do anything. The problem that I have about spring practice was the anti-depth chart movement, and that you weren't actively trying to find that 5-man group that were going to be the leaders of your team in the fall. You had to start that process on August 1st or whatever the day was that pads came on. And because of that, this team was not ready for SEC play and lost 2 games. And the offensive line didn't look particularly good in either one of them. And here's the problem. And this is why I think that this is something that everybody should focus on. Last year, 4 of these offensive linemen were playing offensive line. It was essentially the same group of players available. Ole Miss had a decent running team, a decent passing team, won 11 games. Now, was it as good as it could be? No, it wasn't. That's the reason Ole Miss was supposedly active in the transfer portal to try and upgrade players. But the malpractice in spring and fall were at detriments of this unit. And now in the middle of the season, Lane Kiffin and John Garrison are still trying to find their best 5 players. Questions that honestly should have been answered 6 months ago. You should have had an idea coming out of spring, at least 4 of the 5 players that needed to go. And in the fall, there wasn't going to be much of a competition in between players. If you remember during fall camp and everything is like this offensive line, man, we're competing all over the place. We have no idea who the 5 is going to be, and it's showing, honestly. It is absolutely showing. Again, this isn't about the hot dog eating contest or anything like that. This is about them trying desperately to avoid anything resembling a depth chart to the current players on the roster because they were so afraid of the spring transfer portal window that they put themselves behind the 8 ball moving into this season. The offensive line grade right now, it's a D-. It's not quite an F. It's a D-. The running back grade right now is a C. They don't even know who the correct players potentially are in that part of the room. They don't play much at the wide receiver position. It is interesting. Quarterback is right now at C. Running backs at C-. Offensive line is at D-. And wide receiver, we'll talk about that right now. Wide receiver is at B, and that's only because of Trey Harris. It's not because of the other players. Last year, Ole Miss had 3 players over 700-yard receiving. This year, you have one that is 35 to 40% of all the passes and all the passing yards in the offense. It is not varied enough. Ole Miss is not using the weapons that they brought in, that Ole Miss fans paid for, that Ole Miss fans donate to the collective for, are not being used. You end up with a rotation that is really similar to, honestly, the way that it's always worked. And right now, you look at Trey Harris, the offense. Trey Harris, 59 catches, 987 yards, 6 touchdowns. We have to see what his injury was. He did pick up an injury against LSU this past weekend. We have to see what happens, but that's 1 catch away from a 1,000-yard season right now. But if you look at this, he has 59 of 151 catches. That's about 35% of catches on there. He has 987 of 2,384 yards. That's about 3,500 or 35% of the yards as well. And he has half of the touchdowns nearly about as well. The passing offense is Trey Harris. The passing offense is predictable right now. And that is something to know about. And when Trey Harris went down in the game, Caden Lee stepped up and got like 14 targets in the game. He's right now at 27 catches, 429 yards as well. So he became the number 1 receiver essentially after Trey Harris went out. There has to be more variability in this offensive game plan. Right now, you have a situation to where Trey Harris and a couple other receivers are getting doubled. And in the game this weekend against LSU, they started doubling Caden Lee, leaving Ole Miss receivers uncovered on plays. If you look at highlights, there are receivers that are standing wide open because it just doesn't matter. And the defense knows that this wide receiver is not going to get the ball. They don't pay attention to the tight end because Caden Creascorn has like 4 catches this year. Daquan Wright has 3 catches. Ole Miss has to be more varied on their offense. We're going to say the wide receiver unit right now is a B, but that's only because of Trey Harris. If this offensive unit gets varied, we could see a situation that this offense could get explosive again, and it could get explosive very quickly. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number 1 Ole Miss podcast. Your support means the world to us. But thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On College Football Podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't even need to search for it. So it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And also exciting news, you can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider. It's the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. It's our texting program that sends you notifications on anything relevant without all of the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial and experience the future of college sports coverage. We're adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description. For everybody watching on YouTube, we'll send you the links to Locked On College Sports as well. Hotty toddy, everyone. Congratulations to Coach Beard and the Ole Miss men's basketball team. I think 24th in the AP. We'll see how that goes. Hotty toddy, everyone.